Today at 6, Britain's airlift operation in Afghanistan nears its end, with the number of dead after yesterday's suicide attack close to 100. Hospitals struggle with scores of wounded, and among the dead, 2 UK nationals and the child of a British citizen. Mohammed Niazi was killed after travelling from London to help his family flee.
Those killed in this awful attack were trying to escape years of violence in Afghanistan. Instead, they became the latest victims in a country torn apart by bloodshed.
What now for those eligible to leave Afghanistan when UK flights end?
We will shift heaven and earth to help them get out. We will do whatever we can in the second phase.
British troops will begin their pullout this weekend. Also on the programme, calls for a change in visa rules to get more lorry drivers from the EU to help Britain's supply of food. This bank holiday weekend, health officials urge festival goers not to ignore the risk of COVID. And welcome back to Manchester. Cristiano Ronaldo and United agree a deal to return to Old Trafford.
Coming up on Sports Day later in the hour on BBC News, a much better day for India. They still trail England, but might yet salvage something from the third test at Headingley.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The British operation to airlift thousands of Afghan and UK citizens out of Afghanistan has begun to draw to a close. Boris Johnson admits not everyone eligible to leave can be airlifted out, but he insists the government would do whatever it could to help those left behind. It follows yesterday's suicide bomb attack at Kabul airport, in which close to 100 people are now confirmed dead. It's also been revealed that 2 of those killed were British nationals, along with the child of another British citizen. The Pentagon says 13 US military personnel were among those who died. Our correspondent in Kabul, Secunda Kamani, has the very latest and a warning his report contains some distressing images.
Distraught relatives search Kabul's morgues looking for their loved ones. This baby you managed to save? Yeah. But then there's another baby. Amongst those killed, Mohammed Niazi, a British Afghan who had travelled into Kabul from London to try and help his family get inside the airport. His eldest daughter, youngest child and wife are all still missing. His brother was at the airport alongside him.
I saw some small children on the river. It was so bad. It was doom day for us.
Many of those we meet say their relatives weren't killed in the blast, but by firing in the confusion afterwards. They believe by foreign soldiers.
Somehow I saw the American soldier, and beside this there were Turkish soldiers. So the fire come from the bridges, like the towers.
From the soldiers?
Yeah, from the soldiers.
America's Department of Defense didn't reply to our request for comment. The suicide bombing, claimed by the Islamic State group, would have ripped through the densely packed crowd, causing panic. The blast has left 2-year-old Mohammad Reza fighting for his life. This looks set to be one of the deadliest incidents ever in this horrific conflict. So many of the victims, those who had worked with the international community. Nur Mohammed had been employed alongside American forces.
The guy has served US Army for years, and the reason he lost his life. He wasn't killed by Taliban, he wasn't killed by ISIS. US Army started shelling.
How can you be sure?
Because of the bullet. The bullet went inside of his head, next to right here, near to his ear. He doesn't have any injury.
These are Nur Mohammed's 8 children. He had hoped to give them a better life. Instead, this afternoon, they said a final goodbye. Those killed in this awful attack were trying to escape years of violence in Afghanistan. Instead, they became the latest victims in a country torn apart by bloodshed. Tens of thousands of people have been flown out of the country. But now only foreign nationals are being allowed inside the airport. The British government has acknowledged some of those who want to leave will be left behind, like this former interpreter.
I think it's not fair. It's like a betrayal of their own heroes.
These are the last days of a chaotic evacuation effort. For those who haven't made it out, a deeply uncertain future. Sikandar Kamani, BBC News, Kabul.
Well, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, is in the Afghan capital for us. Now, Lise, several countries have already stopped flights. The British are winding down their flights. The US airlift ends next week. Where does that leave people who want to get out of the country if the Taliban lets them do so?
But may I just begin by underlining, if it needs to be underlined, how cruel, how savage it is that people who've been living day in, day out, year in, year out, with this everyday kind of violence, including savage attacks, get to the airport gates. They're on the cusp of finally leaving for a safer place, and this same violence shatters that hope and brings even more grief for their families. That is why so many Afghans, thousands and thousands of Afghans, those who don't even have an Afghan passport, are trying to grab this golden ring, this opportunity they feel could be the once-in-a-lifetime chance to leave. The reality is, yes, as you mentioned, that the hours are now counted, the papers are now counted. The British are now saying we may not even be able to process the last 1,000 and more who are already through that crush and are waiting to board an aircraft. But Afghanistan will not pack up and go away. There will be commercial flights, and countries like Canada have just said that if Afghans get to a third country, we'll still be helping them. So one window will shut. Another, smaller, will open.
OK, Lise, thank you. Lise Doucet there live in Kabul. Well, the imminent withdrawal of UK troops does raise the question of how those still eligible to come to the UK will be able to leave if they're allowed to do so by the Taliban. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has called for a clear plan to help those left behind. Here's our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale.
It's been the biggest airlift in recent history. A mammoth operation, overall more than 100,000 people evacuated in less than 2 weeks. More than 14,000 flown out by the RAF, twice the number they originally planned. But the British effort is now over, with hundreds still left behind.
As we come down to the final hours of the operation, there will sadly be people who haven't got through, people who might qualify. And what I would say to them is that we will shift heaven and earth to help them get out. We will do whatever we can.
The final phase of this operation is getting out the 1,000 British troops who provided security. That is now underway. It's US troops who'll be the last to leave. Drawing down forces in a hostile environment is already high risk. All the more so with the continuing threat of another terrorist attack.
So the dangers are the same. Somebody will target the aeroplanes or the runway or the aircraft as they leave or depart, or try and penetrate the perimeter of the airport in order to break into the evacuation. We've seen no sign of any of that happening so far, other than the terrible carnage of the bomb yesterday.
The government's expressed deep regret that it wasn't able to get everyone out. Those left behind may now have to join the rush for the border. Few of these were being allowed to cross into Pakistan. Around 1,000 Afghans who worked for the British are still stranded, living in danger. So how will they get out now?
These are people that are eligible to come out because they've worked alongside us on the front line in Afghanistan. Some of those individuals have not had their claims processed in time. Some of them were not called forward, haven't managed to get through the barriers. And we need an urgent plan for them because they're very much at risk.
It's not just people left behind, but the military hardware of an entire army, trained and equipped by the US and its allies. Now in the hands of the Taliban, who'll decide what happens next. The airlift will soon be over, but the inquest into how Afghanistan fell apart so quickly has only just begun. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Well, our political correspondent Ian Watson is at Westminster. Ian, Boris Johnson, he's promising to shift heaven and earth, he says, to get people out who are left behind. How's he proposing to do that without an airlift?
Well, Clive, it's quite a bold claim, isn't it, moving heaven and earth? And I think Boris Johnson is using that language partly to reassure those who've been left behind, but partly also to reassure some of his own MPs. So, for example, the Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat, who has served in Afghanistan, says it fills him with anger and shame that so many people are being left behind. Many of his colleagues feel the same too. The Lib Dems are calling for an urgent inquiry, and Sir Keir Starmer is pressing for evidence that there's a plan to get people to the borders. Now, how's he going to do it? Well, as I understand it, planning's still at a very early stage. Officials here in Whitehall and elsewhere are still grappling with the practicalities. For example, where and to what extent should they set up processing centres in neighbouring countries? Now, it's always controversial when we get involved in foreign conflicts, but it's proving that withdrawal after 20 years brings practical and political difficulties of its own, and those are going to persist after our troops come home this weekend.
Ian, thank you. Ian Watson there at Westminster. Well, after yesterday's suicide bombing, America and its allies will now have to consider how best to deal with the threat from the offshoot of the Islamic State group, ISIS-K, that's claimed responsibility. Our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera, is here with me. We had a Pentagon briefing today. Lots of other information coming out. Are we any clearer as to exactly what happened yesterday?
There is still some confusion, actually, about what happened yesterday. The Pentagon clarified that they didn't think there'd been 2 explosions, 2 suicide bombers, just one, they said. Still talking about a gunman, about enemy fire, but those reports are still quite vague. The one thing they do seem confident about is that the group carrying out this attack were ISIS-K. This is a radical group, a rival to the Taliban. Where the Taliban has been focused on just Afghanistan, getting troops out, ISIS-K sees itself as part of this bigger global jihadist struggle. And it will see yesterday's attack as a kind of victory for it, because it will have tried to portray itself as having fought the Americans on the way out and having undermined its rival, the Taliban. Worth saying, the Pentagon also said there are still specific credible threats of more attacks.
But now there's a suggestion that Western forces are going to have to work with the Taliban to deal with ISIS-K. What's that about?
Well, it is really tricky and complicated. President Biden last night, in quite an emotional statement, said, we're going to hunt for those who did this, ISIS-K. The challenge is how. It is going to be harder when the US is no longer on the ground in Afghanistan. It hasn't got troops there. It hasn't got the ability to collect intelligence in the same way. The Pentagon is saying, well, we've got over-the-horizon capabilities. That's code for drone strikes. But one of the questions is, are they going to be able to continue this kind of uneasy relationship they've had with the Taliban in securing the airport to also go after ISIS-K? Or will that break down? How will the relationships continue? The US says that the priority is making sure no threats emanate from Afghanistan. The reason they've been in such a rush to get out, it's said, is because President Biden wants to get out for the 20th anniversary of 9/11 in a couple of weeks. Well, they went in there because Afghanistan had become a safe haven for groups planning attacks on the West. The issue for President Biden will be what happens if it becomes a safe haven again for terrorist groups like ISIS-K. What will they do about it?
OK, Gordon, thank you. Gordon Carrera there. Well, here in the UK, many members of the Afghan community are worried for the safety of family members who remain in Afghanistan, and efforts are underway to support those who've made it out of the country. Sarah Campbell has been speaking to people at an Afghan community association in West London.
Desperate for help, Leader's brother worked for the police in Kabul. She now fears he will be killed by the Taliban.
I need the help for my whole family, but the most for him, because he is in high risk.
Because he was in the police? Kadria is one of the team at this community association trying to help others, all too aware that her own family in Afghanistan may be in danger.
He said to me on the phone, maybe I don't see you again. I was like, for me it's really hard to hear that, and I would like to see my dad again.
Every day since the crisis in Afghanistan deepened, people have been coming here to try and get some help and advice. They all have loved ones or members of their family stuck in Afghanistan, and they are desperately trying to help them. A steady stream of toys, toiletries and clothes are being dropped off, sorted and then taken to the hotels where those who've made it out are in quarantine.
Obviously, they've come in crazy conditions to this country, not having anyone, not knowing what is going on, what's going to happen to their family back home. So to know that there is a community here that's looking out for them, I think mentally it gives them some sort of comfort.
And the unknown is how many more Afghan people are going to need help. Sarah Campbell, BBC News, Feltham, West London.
It is just after 6:15. Our top story this evening. And Britain's airlift operation in Afghanistan nears its end, and 2 British citizens and the child of a British national are among the dead in yesterday's suicide attack. And coming up, the women reinventing Shakespeare for new audiences.
Coming up in Sports Day in the next 15 minutes on the BBC News channel, we'll head live to Old Trafford after one of the signings of the summer. Cristiano Ronaldo is heading back to Manchester United.
The government is under increasing pressure to change visa rules and attract more lorry drivers from the European Union to help fill gaps in the UK's food supply chain. The Morrisons supermarket boss has told the BBC that more drivers need to be recruited, and there are other calls for a special 12-month COVID recovery visa to help food producers adjust to new post-Brexit migration rules and avoid widespread food shortages. Our business editor, Simon Jack, has more details.
At this convenience store in the outskirts of Coventry, it's hard to know where the next gap in the shelves will appear.
So what are we looking at, Paul?
Owner Paul Chima showed me his latest delivery notice. Dozens of items are missing.
Lemonade, water, eggs, bread, and we didn't find out till today.
To serve his local customers, he's having to scramble.
We haven't got milk on the shelf one day. We haven't got bread on the shelf the second day. That customer comes back on the third day and we haven't got it again. Will that customer rely on us the next day? Probably not so. But that's a major impact on the business, because then we have to jump in a van, we have to call local suppliers, and we have to go and source that product to put it back on the shelves.
This is the weakest link in the chain. An exodus of EU lorry drivers, COVID delays to new training, and a lack of younger UK workers applying has created a transport crisis.
I've not known it for the last 25 years to be like this. So previously, if we advertised for a job, you can guarantee within a week or 2 weeks we'd fill that place. Now we're advertising all year round, and you see for yourself we've got vehicles stood because we haven't got the workforce there to carry out the work. I don't know how it's going to be fixed. That's the honest answer.
2 prospective new drivers didn't even show up for interview today.
The most acute shortage of all is people. And without people to drive trucks like this, they stand idle like this, and the supply chain begins to break down. And what Brexit did do, with the sudden outflux of up to 20,000 drivers, was expose that there are sectors like this, like food processing, which over years UK workers have been less and less keen to do. And fixing that is not going to be quick, it's not going to be easy, it will take time and money, and that ultimately must mean higher prices.
The boss of Morrisons told the BBC he thought retail competition would limit price rises, but agreed with food producers that a solution should include letting in more EU workers to plug the gaps.
We could prioritise HGV testing so that they get rid of the backlog and start to open up that pipeline. And we could look at a list of people who come into the country to work, maybe add the drivers to that list for a while, see how we get on with that. Because we need to break the back of the issue in order to keep what is a great supply chain working in Britain.
But the government is adamant it wants employers to rely less on foreign labour. However, the UK food growing season is ending, meaning greater reliance on EU food in winter, precisely when further checks on imports come in. These problems could get worse before they get better. Simon Jack, BBC News.
The government's latest coronavirus figures show there were 38,046 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 34,177 new cases per day in the last week. The most recent figures show there were nearly 7,000 people in hospital with the virus as of yesterday. 100 deaths were recorded in the past 24 hours, with an average of 108 deaths a day in the past week. On vaccinations, 88.2% of adults in the UK have now had their first jab, and 78% have had 2 jabs. And there's been a big rise in the number of COVID cases in Scotland, with a record of 6,835 new infections in a single day. However, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, says the Scottish Government isn't currently considering a circuit breaker lockdown. Our correspondent, Alexandra Mackenzie, has more details.
The number of new cases of coronavirus is rising sharply in Scotland. Here in Western Bartonshire, figures have been particularly high. More than 6,800 new cases across the country is a significant increase. But a record number of people were tested, and hospital admissions, though on the rise, are much lower than at the beginning of the year. The First Minister said the current situation is a cause for concern.
In the past 7 days, we've reported more new cases than at any previous time in the pandemic, although I refer back to my point there about higher levels of testing. But case numbers have roughly doubled over the course of the past 7 days.
Previous peaks in the number of COVID cases in January and June this year involved fewer than 4,000 infections, whereas the figure has now climbed to almost 7,000.
Two things have directly contributed to the rise in cases in Scotland. The first thing is August the 9th, the removal of all legal restrictions, and then soon after the return of schools over the last few weeks. Those things, two things together, have combined to create a very high level of infection in Scotland that we didn't fully anticipate.
People in Glasgow enjoyed some late summer sunshine this afternoon, but as we move into the autumn and winter months, there is some unease about what that may bring. Now, Nicola Sturgeon said she doesn't want to impose new restrictions. She wants to keep the country moving forward. She said they're not thinking about a circuit breaker lockdown. She said the vaccine is giving some optimism. But the next challenge is going to be when students come back to colleges and universities and what impact that's going to bring.
Alexandra, thanks for that. Alexandra Mackenzie there, live in Glasgow. Well, the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics show a rise in coronavirus cases right across the UK. The government says it's providing additional logistical support to some local authorities in the southwest of England, which have seen a spike in cases. With an estimated 500,000 people heading to big music festivals in Leeds and Reading this bank holiday weekend, health officials are urging people to take COVID tests before they go and when they return home. Here's our health correspondent, Dominic Hughes.
At a music festival like Leeds, the outside world can seem far away. But there's no escaping the pandemic, even here. Negative COVID tests and vaccine passes a condition of entry.
Thank you very much.
And the latest data from the Office for National Statistics shows why we should still be concerned. Infections are rising across the UK, especially among younger people.
Did a lateral flow last night and produced a negative result, which sent a text message to me, and I've shown the text message at the door. I'm all ready to go, and I'm feeling quite confident that hopefully I won't carry it or catch it.
This is a very big weekend for both music festivals and events like Pride here in Manchester. And maybe this is what living with COVID looks like, accepting that while events like this are going to go ahead, they will lead to a big spike in infections, and yet at the same time trusting that the vaccines have weakened that link between infection and serious illness. Practical measures like testing can reduce risk, but there's also a heartfelt need for people to start living again.
Festivals bring people together, that's the most important thing, and people are here to have a great time and celebrate. We've been planning this event for months, and COVID has been part of that process.
And some experts say they're worried not so much about the next few days, but more what the weeks ahead will bring.
Children are about to go back to school, people will be coming off their summer vacations, and what we might see when mixing patterns change as we move into September and what that might do to transmission.
Even after 18 months of this pandemic, there's still so much that's uncertain. But one thing we do know, the situation can change faster than anyone anticipated. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Manchester.
Firefighters are tackling a huge blaze at an industrial premises in Leamington Spa. Explosions and strong chemical smells have been reported. Nearby properties were evacuated and local people are being urged to keep their windows and doors closed. Police say one person is missing. A new theatre group called Myrie says it wants to bring a love of Shakespeare to a wider audience as Britain's first all-black, all-female company. The Arts Council estimates only 10% of theatre audiences come from black, Asian or other minority backgrounds, and Marwa hopes to change that. Our Community Affairs correspondent Adina Campbell has more.
One of the world's most iconic scenes, Romeo and Juliet's passionate declaration of love.
If they do see thee, they will murder thee. I have nice cloak.
But now one theatre company wants to shake Shakespeare up, exploring the bard's work through different perspectives.
Than death parole get wanting of thy love.
Thou knowest the mask of night is on my face.
Shakespeare is very British, and that's such a massive part of just British identity, and as well as the industry. And it's like, where do we as black and black mixed race women fit within that, and kind of reclaiming a new narrative of what Shakespeare could be.
Dost thou love me? I know thou wilt say aye, and I will take thy word.
And there be plenty more of these scenes from Mauer Theatre Company, the UK's first all-black, all-female group, committed to reinventing Shakespeare's most famous texts for modern-day audiences.
The bell invites me.
Which they believe will make theatre more inclusive, a place for everyone to relish new interpretations.
Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell.
And I think that's a way to modernise it, finding those themes and conflicts and the joy that happens in the black community and where that fits in with Shakespeare. With The Winter's Tale, one of the videos we're doing in our first project, it explores child loss and black mortality rates.
And all of Mauer's shows will be written, directed, produced and acted by black women.
There does seem to have been a lot of progress, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, with the number of on-screen actors from more diverse backgrounds, people directing, people in the production team. But how do you think that translates in theatre?
It's not just about what people are seeing on stage, it's also behind the scenes. Black hair and makeup teams, it really makes a difference to how everyone feels on set and how comfortable everyone feels.
Their first production, available online this month, is a series of short Shakespeare scenes and monologues. And as we come out of the pandemic, they're looking forward to being back on stage in other upcoming work.
We're not just making theatre for black audiences, they are our main focus, but it's something that can be enjoyed by the whole population.
And Dina Campbell reporting there. Now, Manchester United have announced they've reached a deal with the Italian side Juventus to re-sign their former star Cristiano Ronaldo. There had been speculation the Portugal captain could agree to join the champions, Manchester City, after telling Juventus he no longer had any intention of playing for them. Well, Nesta McGregor is at Old Trafford for us tonight. Nesta, he's 36 years old, 12 years after he last played for United. Why is he going back?
Well, good evening, Clive. Listen, one day Cristiano Ronaldo's life will be made into a movie. And how about this for a final chapter? A fairy tale. Like you say, this was the club where he grew up, both as a man and as a footballer. He signed here in 2003 at the age of 18, spent 6 years, scored more than 100 goals and won numerous trophies, including 3 Premier Leagues and the Champions League as well. Then it was a trip to Spain for Real Madrid and Juventus. But this morning, he went to Juventus's training ground, said he wanted to leave. Now, Ronaldo moves pretty quickly on the field, and this transfer was done at a record pace as well. Just 7 hours later, Manchester United, in a statement on their website, said they were delighted that he'll be back. Now, at 36, he's not the player he once was, but his value off the field is amazing as well. He signed here for just around £13 million. We don't know the length of the deal yet. The only thing now is to agree a medical and personal terms, and I wonder if he'll get that number 7 of Edison Cavani.
OK, Nesta, thanks. Nesta McGregor there. Right, after being outplayed for 2 days, India's cricketers have been fighting back on day 3 of the third test at Headingley. They bowled England out for 432, and at close of play they were 215 for 2. In their second innings, they trail England by 139. Joe Curry has more.
England's tail end may only have lasted half an hour on day 3 at Headingley, but as they left the field with a lead of 354 over India, surely it was a case of not if they would win, but when. England's bowlers were keen to get cracking, and they thought they had an early breakthrough. DRS, though, undoing the decision to the frustration of the home side. And from there, India got into their stride.
All the way.
Before an England breakthrough on the stroke of lunch, Johnny Bairstow alert and able as he sent Raoul packing. Just rewards for England's bowlers and for the crowd bearing with them. After the break, a potential LBW. Joe Root called for a review, a second too late. A costly delay. Sharma would have been out, and given that lifeline, he went on to punish the mistake, bringing up his 50 with ease. Before he succumbed to this from Ollie Robinson to give the England captain something to roar about. Pujara, however, batted on past his half-century, with Captain Kohli going well alongside him to give India hope that perhaps this match isn't over just yet. Joe Corrie, BBC News.
Britain's Paralympians have added 3 more golds to an already impressive tally of medals at the Games in Tokyo. Success for the cyclists and swimmers have put Great Britain in second place behind China in the medals table. From Tokyo, here's Andy Swiss.
Rarely has British sport seen a more versatile or a more victorious athlete. For Kadina Cox, just the start of what could be another golden games. Cox is a cyclist, but also a runner. At the last Paralympics, she won golds at both. And in her first event here in the velodrome, she was once again unstoppable. The time trial is normally won by tiny fractions. Cox won it by more than a second.
And she's done it in fantastic style.
It was, she said afterwards, near perfection, and didn't her team know it? And it was just as emotional for her family watching back home in Leeds.
We were just elated. I mean, the excitement from our end, we were so excited, nervous at the beginning, but we knew she was going to do it.
Could tell the emotions was just overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know, the tears streaming down her face, but massive, proud, so proud of herself. We're proud of her. So.
Well, there's no rest here for Kadina Cox. She has her second cycling event tomorrow, and then next week she switches to the athletics and the 400 metres. 2 different sports for this one remarkable athlete. The word remarkable could also apply to Jacco van Gas, the former serviceman who was injured in Afghanistan in 2009, winning his second medal in 24 hours with bronze in the time trial. And more gold wasn't far away. Over at the pool, in fact, as Hannah Russell led the charge. 2 years ago, Russell took a break from the sport to focus on her mental health. To come back and win, she said, had made her so happy. It was the first of 2 golds in barely 20 minutes. At his first Paralympics, Rhys Dunn taking the 200 metres freestyle in a new world record, no less.
Goal to Rhys Dunn.
In the para-dressage, meanwhile, there was another medal for Natasha Baker. Unable to use her legs, Baker uses her voice and subtle seat movements to guide her horse, known as Lottie. And between them, the pair produced a superb display to claim the silver. And as the track and field got underway, there was success for Maria Lyle as she sprinted to bronze in the 100 metres. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Tokyo.
Now for a look at the weather, here's Stav. Hi there.
Hi there, Clive. Thank you very much. Good evening to you. Mixed fortunes again with the weather. Today some areas were sunny. Much of England was pretty cloudy. And for this weekend, of course, it's a bank holiday weekend for many of us. High pressure is going to dominate. It's going to stay largely dry, variable cloud and some spells of sunshine. Now tonight, most places will be dry, lengthy clear skies across northern and western areas, a bit of low cloud and mist and fog lapping on shore there across Scotland, a bit of cloud across the southeast as well, more of a breeze, so double figure values here, otherwise quite chilly further north and west under those clear skies. So for this weekend, indeed, high pressure dominates. It's going to sit out to the northwest of the UK, bringing all this fine and settled weather. We'll hold on to this breeze across the far southeast and showers over the near continent, never too far away. They could just scrape the very far southeast of England on Saturday, but I think most places will be dry. More of a breeze again across the southeast corner, variable cloud. Bit of low cloud affecting coastal parts of Scotland. Other than that, it's a fine day with plenty of sunshine and warmer too. We could see highs into the mid-20s across parts of central southern Scotland and in towards central and southern parts of Britain too. Now for Sunday and into Monday, it looks like it will be a little bit cooler and we could see a bit more cloud around generally. I think northern and eastern areas will see the thickest of the cloud on Sunday. Best of the sunshine towards the south and the west, where we could see 22, maybe 23 degrees. Otherwise, a little bit fresher further north and east. Similar story on Monday. Of course, it's a bank holiday Monday for many of us. I think there'll be quite a bit more cloud around generally on Monday. Probably the best of the sunshine again, sheltered southwestern areas, perhaps the central belt of Scotland. Top temperatures 20, maybe 21 degrees, but cooler along North Sea coast with that onshore breeze. Our area of high pressure holds on for the upcoming week as well. You can see up all the way into Friday. Looks like it'll stay fine and settled with plenty of sunshine and staying dry for most, but it's not going to be a heat wave by any means. Clive.
OK, Steph, thanks for that. And that's it. Now on BBC One, time for the news where you are. Have a very good evening.